Describe the scene outside the courtroom, both in the lobby of the federal building and outside, compared to when Blagojevich was on trial and other things.
I would say it was very similar to when Blagojevich came in for the first time. More intense because we haven't seen Denny Hastert at all since these charges came to light. He's been very quiet. We didn't even know who his lawyer was until last night. So I say that probably contributed to being just much more of a circus today. Yeah. He barely was trying to get out of his car, trying to move, and I just kept hearing his lawyer say, "Oh my God, oh my God." People were just crushing him.
It was a circus, but there was and there was a lot of tension, I felt, but also solemn because of the nature of the allegations, the nature of the charges around it. All right, so in the courtroom, Hastert came in and sat there for a while, around 10 minutes or more, until the proceedings started. Talk about how he looked as he sat there for the first time in public in the courtroom, flanked by his two lawyers.
Well, he looked pretty uncomfortable. He looked like he couldn't wait to get out of there. Some people were saying that he was a little fidgety. We thought that he just looked, at one point I think he had both hands, and he was looking down, just kind of like a stunned man, like, why am I here, and how can I get out of here as quickly as possible?
There was a very solemn look on his face. He mostly stared straight ahead as I saw him. And there was at one point in conferring with his two lawyers, one of them said something, and the two of them smiled and left out like a little laugh, and Hastert did not break that very, very stern look that he had on his face. All right, so he pled not guilty. He didn't speak. His lawyer did. Talk about the proceedings and what struck you in terms of what actually went on besides the not guilty plea.
Well, the actual proceedings of not guilty plea was, predictable, pretty typical in this stage in the case. Probably what was the most striking was the judge, Thomas M. Durkin. The Durkin family is very well known here in Chicago. One of his brothers is the head of the Republicans in our Illinois House, so they're very well known politically. And that was probably the most compelling part of the hearing, arguably.
The judge for a long time explained his connection to the Hastert family. One of Hastert's son worked at his law firm. His brother, as you said, is a big political guy. The judge himself has given political donations to Hastert, although he said he didn't know him. He said, basically, I went through the basis for recusal. He said, basically, I'm going to recuse myself unless both sides say I shouldn't. Why doesn't he just recuse himself? I mean, it seems to me for a normal person, you've got a high-profile case, the judge shouldn't be someone who's given donations to the defendant.
Well, as he pointed out, he did that when he was a private citizen. One thing I thought that was really compelling was when the judge said, I did contact your staff when you were a congressman and asked to be a judge, and I didn't hear anything back. Yeah. And here he is now in front of him.
But even that, you could say, the guy wanted to be a federal judge badly enough that he's now a federal judge. Just seemed odd to me. During this long proceeding where Hastert spoke briefly, occasionally would murmur, yes, sir, to questions from the judge, he stood pretty ramrod straight, his hands clasped in front of him, listening to the judge and following the proceedings. I was struck by the fact that this is a guy who was Speaker of the House, an international figure in the sense that he's third in line to the presidency. I was struck by how timid he seemed. His shuffle, the way he held himself, similar to when he was Speaker, but he seemed, again, kind of a timid guy in the proceedings.
Right, and as you said, you could barely hear him. I think all he said was yes, sir, to a series of questions. And yeah, I agree that was very striking. But again, here he is. I mean, these allegations are incredible, and they are that he spent an incredible amount of money trying to hide the secret. And if that is true, here he is for the first time, and this thing is out. So you can imagine, all eyes are on him. Right. What's going on there?
So in the legal proceedings, they talked about the one thing, he's free on bond, and they said there are guns that his sons keep in the house and safes. They need to get the guns off the property. Otherwise, what do we know about when the next legal proceeding will be? When the discovery, trial proceedings, or possible plea deal? What do you know about any of that?
Well, we don't have any hint on a plea deal. They did not mention that today. That was one of the things I was looking for, because sometimes when these discussions are farther along, they might make a reference to it in court. We did not hear that.
Would the federal prosecutors be reluctant to engage in plea negotiations in this case? It seems an obvious case for a plea deal.
It does seem an obvious case for a plea deal for the defendant, and I think that generally the prosecution, when they can avoid trial, they will, because it's a sure thing then. The next immediate thing is 4 o'clock deadline that the judge set for
whether
they recuse him. And getting back to that, Thomas Durkin is seen as sort of a friendly attorney in general to defendants. So it's going to be an interesting thing to see here, because Denny Hastert might not want to roll the dice and get somebody who's very pro-prosecution.
And the way the judge has set this up, either side can basically say privately, we want you off the case, and then be off the case. Lastly, your paper and others surely are still looking into the questions, not of the charges necessarily, but the facts around there. So there's going to be more to come on the question of how Dennis Hastert lived his life, right?
Certainly, and there's been now reports of 2 different individuals who are alleging that they are, victims of Denny Hastert. Whether there's more to come there, we'll see.